The most feared man in Chicago fell to his knees, not before an enemy, not before a rival, but before a cleaning woman with bruises on her face and nothing in her pockets. His son hadn't spoken a single word in 8 months. 23 doctors failed. Millions of dollars burned. But this broken woman, who had already buried her own child, walked into his fortress and did what no one else could. What happened next will stay with you long after this story ends. This channel is home to stories about powerful men brought low by love, families shattered and rebuilt from the wreckage, and the quiet moments that change everything: mafia bosses, billionaires, and the ordinary people who somehow reach them. Because this story reminds us, the deepest wounds are the ones that finally open us to love. If that kind of story speaks to you, hit like, drop a comment telling me which character broke your heart first. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.
8 months, 243 days, 5,832 hours. This is the sound of my failure. My son has not spoken a word. He used to shout my name. He used to laugh when I held him. His songs were the only music that mattered in this house. Now, there is only a hollow quiet, a little boy with vacant eyes. I have brought 23 gods of medicine to this altar. I have burned over $4 million as an offering. I have commanded, and I have pleaded. I have used all the power that makes this city fear my name. Yet every night, I watch him arrange his cars in silent, perfect lines. He holds a bear that has lost its shape. I am losing the one war I cannot afford to lose. So I stand before them all, my men, my rivals, the jackals who wait for my throne, and I make them an offer that breaks every rule of our world. I will give up half of my kingdom. I will bind myself to anyone, no matter their station, who can make my son speak. Whispers fill the air like poison. I do not hear them. I see only her. Isabella. It was she who stole his voice. She took it with her to the grave 8 months ago. My prayer is a desperate scream into the void. I do not know the answer is not in some clinic across the world. The answer is on her knees, scrubbing my floors. A woman with scars on her back and nothing in her pockets. She carries a pain that echoes my own. The pain of a mother who watched her child die because she was powerless. While I made my grand declaration, she was miles away in the filth of the South Side. Her name was Eleanor Morgan. She was counting crumpled bills at a greasy diner. $476.03. Her hands were torn from 9 hours of work. She saw only the flickering lights and her own tired reflection. She looked 40 years old, but she was only 27. Rent was a $400 monster, due in 3 days. She had $47. She walked into a cold alley. The wind was a blade against her skin. She smelled them first, the cheap perfume of predators. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. They blocked her path. Their cigarettes burned like angry eyes in the dark. One of them spoke her name. His voice was the sound of grinding stone. He said Tony Marcello sent his regards. Ice flowed through her veins. She pleaded for more time. She spoke of her 3 jobs. She promised she would pay. The first blow stole her breath. The second split her lip. Her mouth filled with the taste of her own blood, $50,000. The other man hissed the number. He twisted his hand in her hair. He told her time was up. They would find other ways to collect. He threw her against the cold brick wall. Her head hit the stone, and the world fractured into light. They told her the debt was her husband's sin. Now she would be the sacrifice. They left her there, a broken thing in the dark. Blood fell from her mouth onto the sullied snow. She lay there for a long time. The sky above was a starless void. This part of the city never saw the stars. She forced herself up. She walked the last 6 blocks home. The building was a carcass. The elevator was a ghost. The stairs cried out with every step she took. Her apartment was one cold room, a bed on the floor, a window that never closed. The heater made noise but gave no warmth. But one thing made it a sanctuary. A plastic frame sat on a wooden crate. Inside was a girl with hair like gold. Her eyes were the color of a summer sky. Her smile was missing a tooth. Beside the picture was a small bracelet, pink and purple beads. Lily. The woman fell onto her bed. She held the picture against her chest. Memory is a slow poison. She remembered the homes. The first one had a closet for a cage. The second had a father whose belt was a weapon. The third taught her that safety was found only in silence. She remembered fighting her way out. She studied sign language. She wanted to give a voice to children who had none. She remembered the man named Marcus. She believed his words. She remembered Lily. Her heart was a fragile bird. The doctor said she needed a miracle that cost $200,000. Insurance said no. She remembered the hospital room. She watched the line on the monitor go flat. Her screams found no answer. And Marcus, the husband, the protector, he disappeared that night. He left behind a debt that fed on hope. That was 2 years ago. The woman had been dying ever since. Her phone made a sound. She saw a notification. A job. A housekeeper on the Gold Coast. The pay was high. It demanded absolute silence. It was an immediate opening. The Gold Coast. My world. A place of gilded cages and hungry shadows. She looked at the screen. She looked at the bruises on her arms. She looked at the smiling girl in the frame. She chose a faster death over a slow one. She would at least have a final meal. She touched the screen. She applied. 3 days after my words shook this city, she stood at my gates. Her heart was a frantic drum. She had never seen such a place. The walls were high, and the cameras watched her every move. A long driveway cut through perfect gardens. Marble statues stood guard like ancient ghosts. The house was a palace of white stone. It rose 3 stories into the gray sky. She clutched her old purse. She felt every flaw in her cheap clothes. The yellow bruise on her face was hidden beneath bad makeup. A guard approached her. His face was stone. Her name was Eleanor Morgan. She was here for the housekeeper job. He checked his list. Another guard, a woman, searched her. They checked her bag and her pockets. A metal wand swept over her body. She stood there and swallowed her pride. The man told her to follow him. The walk felt like a mile. 117 steps from the gate to the great front door. The inside stole her breath. The floors were polished marble. A chandelier like a fallen star hung from the high ceiling. A grand staircase curved up into the shadows. But it was all wrong. The house was a beautiful corpse, cold and empty. There were no pictures, no signs of life, no hint that a family ever lived here. The guard led her to a room. A woman was waiting. She was maybe 60 years old. Her silver hair was a tight knot. Her eyes were sharp and unforgiving. She wore a simple black dress. Her back was straighter than a soldier's. She commanded the woman to sit. The woman sat. My head housekeeper introduced herself. Margaret Crawford. She was the final gatekeeper to my world. You will report to me. I opened the file. Eleanor Morgan, 27. Her history was simple. Waitress, janitor, factory hand. No police record, no family. Those last words were a relief, a clean slate. I asked her why she wanted the position. For the money, she said. Direct. I pressed her. Everyone needs money. Why here? This house carries stories, shadows. I see many things, she replied. I know not to listen. A flicker of something settled in me. Not approval, just a quiet acknowledgement of a useful trait. Good. The rules are absolute. First, the young master does not exist to you. No contact, no glances, no words. Do you understand? She nodded. Second, Mr. Castellano's affairs are his own. You will see. You will hear. You will immediately forget. Another nod. Third, what happens here stays here. No one outside these walls will hear of it. Break this, and the consequences will be absolute. I leaned in. Do you know what absolute means in this house, Miss Morgan? Her gaze was steady. I understand. I watched her, then I stood. Come with me. The tour was a necessary wait. 12 bedrooms, 8 baths, a library, a ballroom. Grand, empty spaces I had to keep pristine. A tomb. On the second floor, I moved faster past the boys' room. The door was not quite shut. A sliver of light, a sliver of him. He sat by the window, holding a bear. Still. His eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. Windows to an abandoned place. I knew those eyes. I had seen them on my own sister, in the final weeks. When the silence took her long before her breath, a sharp pain tightened in my chest. I had sworn to protect this house from that kind of pain. I had built a fortress of order. I saw the girl stop. Miss Morgan. My voice was a blade cutting the connection. She had her hand on her heart. A weakness. She was a risk. I had to manage this. I forced her to walk, to follow, to obey. But I saw the image of the boy reflected in her eyes. I had walled this house off from feeling. It was the only way to protect what was left. Pain was a disease, and I was the cure. When his black car arrived, I was waiting. He was wounded from his meeting. The world outside smells weakness like blood. Mr. Romano met him with the news. 437 responses. 90% were useless. Scavengers. Psychics and healers promising false hope. He mentioned the others, 6 assassins who thought the boy was away inside, away to the master. Handled, he said, that was all. His son's room was dark, the boy was awake, staring. The bear was tucked under his chin. He sat on the bed. I heard his voice crack. Daddy's home. Silence. He spoke of his wife, of laughter that no longer existed in these halls. He touched the boy's cheek, skin over a hollow shell. Lucas, please, just look at me. The boy did not move. He was lost in the wreckage of that day. The day she fell. The day the silence began. A flaw in her heart, they said. A hidden bomb. By the time he arrived, she was gone, and the boy had not spoken a word since. He held the bear. It smelled of her. His failure was a ghost in the room. I failed you. I could not save you. Now I am losing him. I heard the sound of a man breaking. The most powerful man in the city, undone by a child's toy. I knocked. Sir, the new girl is settled. Her background is clean, unremarkable, perfect. Fine. He wiped his face. Make sure she knows the rules. Yes, sir. I left him to his grief. It was his to carry. My duty was to the house, to the order. I did not know that 3 floors down, the unremarkable girl was also crying, holding a picture. I did not know her sorrow mirrored his. A week passed. The girl learned to be invisible. She was efficient, a ghost in the halls, cleaning, never speaking. She understood the schedule. The nanny, Nicole, took the boy to his appointments. The master came and went like a shadow. I watched everything. And Lucas, the small phantom, drifted through it all. I saw the girl watch him. She thought I did not notice. The way her eyes followed his silent steps. The way her hands would pause when he was near. She was here for a job, she told herself. I knew better. Every glance at those vacant eyes was a crack in my foundation. A threat to the order I maintained. On Tuesday, she was polishing the banister. She felt him. He was there. Lucas stood just feet away, watching. Her breath caught. He was so small up close, pale with dark circles under his empty eyes. He held the bear like an anchor. She started to speak. No. Nicole was there instantly, her voice sharp. Lucas. She pulled him away. What did I tell you about wandering? She turned on the girl. And you. Do not engage. Ever. Is that clear? I was just... Understood. The girl looked down. Yes. But before he turned, the boy looked back. I saw it. A flicker. A connection. It was poison. Later I found her in the living room. A drawer was open. She held the silver frame. A picture of her. My lady, Isabella. The girl's blood ran cold. I could see it. She knew that face. 2 years ago. A hospital. The night her own world ended. Her child was dying. She had begged for help, and a doctor had come. A kind woman with tired eyes. My Isabella, I am so sorry, she had said. The surgery requires payment. The hospital will not do it. I have tried. I cannot do more. The girl had hated her, blamed her. Isabella Castellano. The photograph shook in her hands. The woman who could not save her child was the woman whose death had broken mine. What are you doing? I stood in the doorway. My voice was calm, hard. My eyes went from her face to the picture. I was cleaning, she stammered. I found this. That was my wife. The words were stones. I know, the girl whispered. And in that moment, I knew she had to be removed. She was not a tool. She was a memory, a weakness, a ghost from a past I had to keep buried. I spared no expense. They were the best. But they were all the same. They promised solutions and delivered silence. I watched the maid flinch when I looked at her. She saw the boy and the dead woman, a foolish observation. A long quiet settled between us. I stared at her, trying to decipher the flicker in her eyes. Do you have children? The question left my lips before I could stop it. I did. Her voice was a ghost. Once. The ice around my own heart fractured for a second. A raw nerve was exposed. What happened? She died. The silence that followed was a crushing weight. I saw her then, not as staff, not as an object in my house, but as someone who knew my language, the unspoken tongue of loss. She walked away, her form unsteady. I watched her go. Her retreat felt like an accusation. For the first time in 8 months, I saw someone else's pain. The next day, my home became a clinic. Black sedans filled the drive. Men and women in sharp suits moved with purpose, their briefcases full of useless theories. Guards verified their identities at every door. The maid, Ellie, became part of the wallpaper, clutching her mop, invisible. Dr. Samuel Hayes marched in first. He was a monument to his own success, a man who radiated an infuriating confidence. With him came a psychologist, a therapist, a neurologist. 3 assistants hauled equipment I did not understand, the finest minds money could buy. I heard one of the staff whispering. I had them flown from Boston. They led Lucas to the library. My son's sanctuary was now their laboratory. I watched from the hall as his nanny guided him. He moved like a puppet with cut strings. Mr. Buttons trailed behind him, a forgotten friend. The doors shut. For 3 hours I patrolled the hallway, a caged animal in my own home. I heard their voices, first calm, then strained. I heard the click of tools and the shuffling of paper. Their false cheer was an insult to my son's silence. There was nothing to give. The doors finally opened. Dr. Hayes stepped out, his confidence shattered. His team followed, their faces masks of failure. Lucas emerged last. His expression was a blank slate. Nothing had changed. Nothing ever changed. I came from my study, a desperate hope dying in my chest. Well? I demanded. The doctor cleared his throat. Mr. Castellano, we employed every method available to us. Cognitive techniques, therapy, sensory tools. Results, I cut him off. I needed results. He paused. Physically, your son is perfectly healthy. His vocal cords function. His brain shows nothing unusual. The problem is entirely psychological. He hesitated. Lucas has constructed a fortress around his mind. I am sorry, But none of our methods can breach it. A suffocating stillness filled the air. "Get out," I said, my voice low. "Mr. Castellano, perhaps if—" I said, "Get out!" My voice roared against the marble. "All of you." The celebrated team fled like frightened mice. Vincent materialized beside me, his face lined with concern. "Boss, be calm. The Moretti family is watching. If they sense this—" "I do not care about the Morettis." The main door opened. My mother entered. She was 65 years of refined steel, dressed in black silk. Diamonds glittered like ice at her throat. Her face, a colder version of my own. "Dominic." Her voice could extinguish flames. "We must speak." "Not now, Mother." "Yes, now." Her eyes dismissed the fleeing doctors. "Another spectacular failure. How many does that make? 20? 30? My jaw clenched. "Your little announcement has made this family a joke," she said. "Our rivals are circling. They sense weakness. You are destroying your father's legacy. I am trying to save my son. By offering half our empire to any fraud who claims he has a cure?" She moved closer. "You are leading with your heart, Dominic. A mistake your father never made." "My father did not bury his wife," I snapped. "I have already lost Isabella. I will not lose Lucas." We faced each other, 2 blocks of unyielding stone. From the shadows, the maid watched. I felt her gaze. She saw Lucas taken upstairs, a small, defeated soldier. She saw the experts prod and test him like a broken toy. She saw that none of them saw him. They saw a problem to be solved. They did not see the boy. I knew this. I saw it too. What did she know of loss? Her quiet grief was a pinprick next to my inferno. Later that night, I went to his room. A sound escaped me, a broken thing. I knelt by his bed, my shoulders shook. I buried my face in his blankets. The sounds I made did not belong to a man of my power. They were the sounds of a father who had nothing left. The maid, I knew, was in the hall. She heard everything. She saw everything. She retreated into the shadows, a silent witness to my undoing. The next morning, the mansion reset itself. The failure was erased. The doctors were gone. Their machines were gone. Mrs. Crawford commanded the staff with brutal efficiency. The house ran like a perfect, soulless machine. No one spoke of what had happened. No one acknowledged the sounds from the night. The maid was dusting furniture. Her focus was a lie. Her mind was on me, on my moment of weakness. I saw it in her posture. A soft noise drew my attention. Lucas was in the doorway. He stood like a statue. The bear, Mr. Buttons, dangled from his hand, its paw brushing the floor. Then it fell. The toy landed with a soft, final sound. Lucas just stared at it. His face was empty. He did not move. He could not move. It was as if gravity itself was too much for him to fight. I watched from my study. The hall was empty. The nanny was gone. I knew the rules. No one was to approach him. But the maid was looking at the boy, at his lost toy, at his vacant eyes. She could not help herself. Slowly, she put down her cloth and went to him. She knelt, putting herself on his level. She picked up the bear, but she did not give it back. She held it, and with her free hand, she made a gesture, a strange, deliberate motion with her fingers. "Friend," she whispered, making the sign again. "This means friend." Lucas's gaze sharpened. For the first time, something moved in his eyes. A spark. His attention was fixed on her hands. It was a focus I had not seen in months. The maid repeated the sign. Lucas watched her. He tilted his head. A flicker of light. A brief, impossible moment of connection. Then it vanished. But I saw it. I had seen it. "Lucas!" The nanny's voice was a whip crack. She appeared in the hallway, her face a mask of fury. "What are you doing?" She snatched Lucas's arm, yanking him from the maid. "You were ordered to stay away." He dropped his bear, the maid said, rising. I was only giving it back. I saw what you were doing. The nanny's eyes were slits. I do not know what scheme you are attempting, but I am reporting this. She dragged my son away. But Lucas looked back. His eyes met the maid's. In that glance, I saw something dangerous. Not hope, not a connection. I saw a threat, an unknown variable in my controlled world. That night, I made my decision. This maid, this Ellie, with her shared grief and her secret language, was an anomaly. She had reached my son when all the experts could not. And that made her powerful. It made her a risk. I could not allow risks. I would not allow false hope. The fortress Lucas had built was for his protection, and for mine. I would not let some servant tear it down with simple tricks of the hand. She had to go. The security feed was my only connection to him, a silent, flickering window into his silent world. Vincent's call was an unwelcome disturbance, a problem. A cleaner was seen with my son, making gestures. I watched the recording, my jaw tight. Any unsanctioned contact was a threat. She was a variable I had not accounted for. Her hands moved in the air, a language I did not understand, and that made it dangerous. My first instinct was to remove her, permanently. This world requires order, and she was chaos. But something in the boy's stillness as he watched her stayed my hand, a flicker of focus in his otherwise vacant eyes. For now, I would simply watch. Her every move would be scrutinized. Every breath she took in this house would be documented. I gave the order to my men. A new file was opened that night. The game, as she might have seen it, was already mine to control. Reports from the staff were unsettling. Scraps of paper found in his room. Crude drawings. A child's hand trying to mimic the gestures I had seen on the security feed. He was engaging, responding. This was not supposed to happen. His silence was a fortress I had built around him to keep him safe from the world that took his mother. Now, this woman was digging at the foundations with her bare hands, leaving him notes. Water, eat, sleep. Simple words, harmless words. But they were a code between them, a secret language that excluded me. I saw him practicing by the window one afternoon, his small fingers mimicking the shapes. He was not just responding, he was learning. He was building a bridge to her, away from me. My protection was failing. The emptiness I had worked so hard to preserve was being filled with something I could not control. And that was a danger I would not tolerate. They never spoke. There were no audible words exchanged. Yet a connection was forming without my permission. It was a silent rebellion growing under my own roof. I saw the change in him. The rigid set of his shoulders had begun to soften. His gaze, once fixed on nothing, now followed the staff with a hint of awareness. This was not healing. It was contamination. Then Nicole's report came. She had found him with the bear, his hands moving, practicing, showing the stuffed animal a sign he had learned. Friend. The word echoed in the silent report. A concept I had forbidden. Friends were liabilities. Attachments were weaknesses. She had given him a word that could get him killed. He was not just learning signs. He was learning hope, and hope, in our world, is the most dangerous poison of all. Nicole's suspicion was my confirmation. The woman had to be dealt with. He showed the sign to a toy. His small hands formed the word for friend. He was sharing a secret with an inanimate object. Nicole's panicked call confirmed everything. Within minutes, I had the footage from 3 days prior on my tablet. The cleaner kneeling, her hands moving with deliberate intent. It was a breach of protocol, a direct challenge to my authority. Vincent stood beside my desk. The new housekeeper, he stated, his voice flat. Nicole says the boy has been acting strangely. I saw it not as strange, but as compromised. He was being influenced, manipulated. My control was slipping. I watched the silent video again. Her face was earnest. Her movements precise. She was not careless. She was intentional. Bring her to me, I said. The command was quiet, final. The time for observation was over. It was time for containment. 9 o'clock. The house was quiet. I sat in my study, the darkness a familiar comfort. The knock on her door would be sharp, authoritative. The guards who escorted her were extensions of my will, their expressions impassive. They would lead her through the silent, unfamiliar corridors of my home. The journey was designed to intimidate, to unnerve, to remind her of her place. I watched the door. When it opened, she was framed in the doorway, small and pale. The single lamp on my desk cast me in shadow, a figure of judgment. I was the predator in my own domain. Close the door, I commanded. The sound of the heavy wood clicking shut was the end of her world and the beginning of mine. She stood before me, her fear a palpable thing in the air. We need to talk, Miss Morgan. It was not a request. It was a verdict waiting to be delivered. I stepped into the light. My guards tensed. The shadows clung to me, a second skin I had worn for years. What are you doing with my son? My voice was a low threat, a promise. Control was everything. Her eyes darted, searching for an escape. She could lie. She could invent a game. She could beg. I had seen it all before. But her gaze met mine, and I saw a flicker of something familiar. A deep, hollowed-out pain. The kind I saw in the mirror every morning. I was teaching him to speak with his hands. My face remained a mask of stone. Why? I used to work with silent children. She breathed in, a ragged sound. Before I scrubbed floors, I gave voice to the traumatized. I helped them find a way to be heard. You left that part out of your application. An omission, she corrected. I needed the work. My history seemed irrelevant. In this house, everything is relevant. I moved closer. I leaned in, searching for the lie. Why him? What is your goal? She swore she had none, her voice fractured. He dropped his toy. He looked so lost, so empty. I saw that look on my own child. Her own pain was a blade turning inside her. I recognized the void because my daughter had it before she was gone. For a heartbeat, the iron around my soul cracked. Your daughter. Lily. The name was a ghost on my tongue. She was only 3 years old, a flaw in her heart. We did not have the money for the doctors. Her composure shattered. She died right there in my arms. The world stopped. Silence filled the room. The same flaw, I heard myself say. The same as Isabella. Yes. Her hands shook as she wiped her face. And there is one more thing. Your wife was at the hospital. She was the doctor who fought for my daughter's life. The floor gave way beneath me. Ellie spoke on. We had no money. The hospital refused. But your wife tried. She fought for Lily. Her voice became a whisper. She wept when she told me it was over. My own failure mocked me. For years I nurtured a quiet rage for my wife's memory. I thought she could have done more to save our child from the silence. Now I see. The fault was never hers. It was this life I built. It was the world that took her and broke my son. My knuckles were white against the wood. Isabella bore this burden alone. She saw so many children we lost to this world. And I never knew. She was a light in this darkness. Ellie's voice was quiet. Her son is still in there. He fights, even if you cannot see it. I met her gaze, the agony raw in my own eyes. The experts called it a fortress of the mind. They said nothing could breach it. A fortress, yes, but every fortress has a gate. She stepped toward me, her fear gone. Lucas is not lost. He is imprisoned. The trauma silenced him. Sign language is another key, a different kind of voice. Why should this be the answer? Because my own daughter signed to me when her voice failed. Her last act was not one of pain. She looked at me. She signed, I love you, Mama. Then she was gone. Tears fell from Ellie's eyes, unabated. Lucas has a war raging inside him. He needs a new weapon to fight it. I remained still for a very long time. A muscle in my jaw jumped, my fists clenched, then released. I pushed my chair back. I walked around the massive desk that separated us. I went to my knees before her, the most feared man in this city, kneeling to a cleaning woman, my own eyes wet with defeat. Please, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. Bring him back to me. That night redrew the map of my world. By dawn, the house operated under new rules. Ellie was no longer staff. She was his communication guide. She had a private room. She had total access. I sent Nicole away. There was no need for an explanation. My mother-in-law accepted the news with a tight, disapproving line for a mouth. Vincent only gave a slight nod. His eyes, however, held a question and a warning for her. The storm broke the next afternoon. It arrived in the form of my mother, Catherine. Her expensive heels sounded like gunshots on the polished stone. Her voice reached me from 2 rooms away. A servant, teaching my grandson. Her words were sharp enough to cut glass. Have you lost your mind, Dominic? She is qualified. She cleans our floors. She also holds a degree in this language. She has worked with children broken by this world. My own voice was dangerously low. Do you have a better plan, Mother? 23 doctors have already failed. 23 men with their reputations and their theories. Not one of them reached my son. She did. This is an embarrassment to our name. Our name is worthless if my heir is a shadow. My voice turned to ice. We are done here. My mother swept past Ellie moments later. Her look was pure venom. Her silence was a promise of future trouble. Ellie did not even blink. She had seen real monsters. The first session started in the playroom. Lucas was a statue on the floor. He clutched that stuffed bear to his chest. His gaze was feral, tracking her every move like a cornered animal. Ellie mirrored him, sitting on the floor, her own posture relaxed. "Hello, Lucas," she began softly. "The notes we passed, the pictures." He did not move, but his hold on the bear eased. "I want to show you signs we can make with our hands." She held up one hand. "This means water." She touched her chin with 3 fingers. Lucas stared, his focus absolute. "Will you try?" A long silence stretched. Then a small hand rose. His fingers were clumsy, but he touched his chin. A victory bloomed in my chest. "Perfect," she breathed. "Truly perfect." The lesson lasted an hour. Water, eat, sleep, happy, sad. Each sign flowed more easily than the one before. Lucas learned them all. His hands moved with a new certainty. And I saw something change in his eyes. The void was still there, but a flicker had appeared within it. A small, defiant light. I watched from the doorway, a crack just wide enough to see. I saw my son's hands move with intent. It had been 8 months. I saw the emptiness recede. I saw the boy he was begin to surface through the quiet. The tears that fell were for him. I did not try to stop them. That night, I found her in the library after Lucas was asleep. "Teach me," I commanded without preamble. "Sir." "The signs. I need to learn them. I need to speak to my son." She nodded, motioning for me to sit. She started with the same simple words she had shown him. Water. Eat. Sleep. My hands are large. They are made for breaking things, not for this gentle language. I struggled with the shapes. My fingers felt thick and useless. A man of my power, unable to master what a child had learned in an hour. But I refused to fail. "Like this," Ellie corrected, her hand guiding mine. "Your thumb goes here, on your chin." She touched me. We both froze. The contact was brief, a spark in the dark. It was something I had not felt, something I had no name for. I pulled back and cleared my throat, performing the sign correctly. "Good," she said, her voice soft. We worked in silence for another hour. The space between us was alive with unspoken things. I finally lowered my hands. Does everyone deserve a second chance? The question left my lips before I could stop it. Her gaze was steady. I believe everyone deserves to be loved, she answered. Even men like you. 2 weeks brought a quiet revolution. Lucas learned more signs each day. His world expanded from words to phrases. He could ask for a drink. He could show what he wanted to eat. He began to name his feelings. One day he stopped their lesson. His hands made the sign for sad. He then pointed at a picture of Isabella. You miss your mother? Ellie signed to him. He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. For the first time, he acknowledged his mother's absence. Ellie held him, and his small body seemed to yield to the comfort. The progress was real. I watched as much as I could. I practiced the signs alone in my office, my calloused hands growing more sure. I sometimes sat with them on the floor, father and son learning a new world together. The nightly lessons with Ellie became more. We talked after my son slept. We spoke of loss. We spoke of grief. We spoke of the strange forces that had put us in this room. The distance between us grew smaller every night. We never said what was happening. We did not have to. Then my world intruded. Vincent stood in my study, his expression grim. We have an issue, boss. I looked up from my work. Explain. Someone is asking about the woman, about her past, her old life. Vincent paused. Tony Marcello. The name was a foul taste in my mouth. The loan shark from the south side, I stated. Her dead husband owed him $50,000. Marcello wants his money. He knows where she is. My face did not change, but my blood ran cold. The air in the room grew heavy. Double the guards on her. I want every door, every window watched. No one gets close to her. Vincent nodded. He hesitated. Boss, she is mine. The words were shards of ice. No one touches what is mine. Vincent left without another word. That night, she made a fatal error. She had left something behind in that old apartment. A photograph of her daughter, a ghost she could not abandon. She told no one of her plan. She took a cab into my enemy's territory after dark. She thought it would be a quick trip. She thought no one would ever know. She was wrong. They were inside, waiting for her. The same two animals who had hurt her before. The place was destroyed. Her mattress was slashed open. The walls were covered in threats. Her things were broken and thrown everywhere. Hello again, Eleanor, the larger one said, his knuckles cracking in the silence. They gave her no chance to make a sound. The beating began. It was a clean operation. Surgical. They inflicted pain with an artist's touch. 2 weeks. I heard the smaller one's threat echo from the speaker. Next time, there would be cutting. Then the bigger one saw it. A flash of color on the floor. Her child's bracelet. Pink and purple. He took it. A trophy. He smiled a predator's smile. This is interest. They left her a wreck in the ruins of her life. She reached for a torn photograph. Her daughter. Her face split in two. She wept, clutching the pieces. The bracelet was gone. She did not know my eyes were on her, that a camera across the street recorded every second. That miles away, I watched, my hands shaking with a cold, pure rage. The iron fist does not forgive. The iron fist does not forget. Darkness covered Chicago. I watched the recording a third time. My teeth ground together. On the screen, she fell. They kicked her. One of them pocketed the bracelet. He was laughing. A switch flipped inside me. I dialed. Vincent. Bring the team. 20 minutes. 6 men stood in the basement. They were my loyal instruments. They had taken lives for me. They never asked why. Tony Marcello. My voice was ice. He works from a warehouse on Holstead. Find him. Vincent waited. Orders. Do not end him. My eyes were cold points of light. Ensure he never forgets tonight. Break what must be broken. Reclaim what he took. Let him know the woman is now mine. Vincent gave a single nod. It is done. They moved like ghosts. They reached the warehouse after midnight. 8 men sat inside. They counted cash. They were lambs unaware of the wolves. The attack took 4 minutes. My men were clean. Brutal. They broke kneecaps. They fractured ribs. They left Marcello on the concrete, his face ruined, pleading. Vincent knelt beside him. He held up the small bracelet. Pink and purple beads. This belongs to someone I protect, he said. You made an error. I had no idea. Marcello choked on his own blood. I did not know she was with you. Now you do. Vincent put the bracelet away. The debt is clear. If you or your men go near her again, if you whisper her name, we will return, and we will be far less merciful. He left Marcello crying in his own blood. The next day she came to the mansion. The bruises were there. She tried to hide them. But the cut on her lip was a declaration. Mrs. Crawford saw it. She kept her silence. Ellie went to the playroom. Lucas was waiting. Her movements were stiff. Pain shot through her ribs. Miss Morgan. A guard stood at the door. Mr. Castellano will see you. Fear flickered in her eyes. Did she think she was in trouble? She followed him. Each step was heavy with dread. I was at the window when she entered. My gaze took in every mark, every bruise. Close the door. My voice was low. She did as she was told. Her hands were unsteady. I walked toward her. I held out a small velvet box. Open it. Her fingers trembled as she did. Inside, on the silk, was the bracelet. Pink and purple beads. Safe. Her breath hitched. How did you? Her voice was broken. No one hurts what is mine, I said. My voice was a vow. You belong to me now, under my protection. Anyone who touches you will answer to me. Tears streamed down her face. She held the bracelet to her chest. Her body shook with sobs. I was frozen. I had built an empire. I had crushed my rivals. But I did not know this. How to stop a woman's tears. I moved awkwardly. I pulled her to me. She collapsed against my chest. Her grief and fear poured out. My arms were stiff. Then they surrounded her. My hand patted her back. It was a clumsy, uncertain gesture. I was holding something fragile. We stood in the silence. 2 broken things. A sound made us turn. Lucas was there. Mr. Buttons in his arms. His eyes were wide. His hands moved. Slow. Deliberate. Ellie sad. It was a full sentence. The first in 8 months. She laughed through her tears. A little sad, she signed back. But better. Lucas looked from me to her. His small hands moved again. I understood. It was a duty. My son needed my help. Dominic's pain was a palpable thing. I saw him kneeling, his strength gone. A son of mine, broken. He signed a clumsy promise. Daddy will help. That night began the unraveling. The boy, Lucas, started this hand-waving nonsense more. He stopped waiting for the girl to command him. He would seek her out, pulling at her clothes. His hands moved with a desperate energy. He wanted things, an apple, a book, to go outside. Then he began forming questions. Why is the sky blue? He asked one day. Where do the birds go? He gestured at the empty sky. Each signal was a betrayal of his mother's memory. It was proof the girl was embedding herself deeper. Then she crossed a line she should never have approached. They sat in the playroom. A lesson on feelings. Happy, sad, angry, scared. Lucas copied her, a little puppet on a string. Then he stopped. He stared at her with an unnerving focus. Do you have a child? He signed the words slowly. The world should have stopped. The girl's hands just hung in the air. her throat constricted. She was a statue, unable to think or move. Lucas waited. He watched her with his father's eyes. They see too much. Finally, the girl gave a small nod. Yes. Her hands were shaking. I had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She took out her phone, a cheap little screen. She showed him a picture. A girl on a swing, hair like gold. Lucas looked at the image. A solemn little judge. Lily is pretty. He signed. She was beautiful. The girl agreed, her eyes watering. And she was sick, like your mommy was. Her heart was not strong. Lucas looked up at her. Lily also did not talk at the end. Yes, she was too weak. But she used her hands just like you do. A sad little smile played on the girl's lips. I taught her signs. Even without a voice, she could tell me she loved me. Lucas processed this. Then his hands moved again. Was Lily sad? No. Lily was happy, because her mommy loved her. A silence settled between them. I watched Lucas on the monitor. His face was a storm of thought. Something was working itself out. Then he signed it. The words that exposed the girl's true goal. Mommy left Lucas. Mommy does not love Lucas. The air in my own study grew thin. I finally understood. He did not think his mother died. He thought Isabella had left him. No. The girl signed with false firmness, taking his hands. No, my dear. Your mommy did not leave you. She was sick. The sickness took her from us. Lucas's eyes filled with tears held back for months. But she left Lucas. She left Daddy. She did not want to. The girl pulled him close. She signed the words against his little chest. Your mommy loved you more than the whole world. She wanted to stay. But sometimes love is not enough to make us stay. Lucas hid his face. His small body shook. Mommy loves Lucas. He signed into her shoulder. More than every star. 3 floors up, I sat before the screen. I watched this performance. I saw the calculated manipulation. Lucas believed Isabella abandoned him. My grandson thought he was unloved, unworthy. My hands trembled with rage. All this time my son was lost in grief. He never saw the poison this girl was planting in his son's mind. My fault, I whispered. I let her in. This is all my fault. I covered my face, but I did not weep. That night, I watched Dominic sneak into the boys' room. Lucas was in bed, his toy tucked under his chin. He was not asleep. My son knelt by the bed. He began to sign. Daddy loves Lucas. The boy's eyes opened. Mommy loves Lucas. Dominic's hands were clumsy, but he was determined. Mommy did not leave. Mommy is always here. He touched the boy's chest, right over his heart. Lucas looked at his father in the dim light. Then, after 8 months, he moved. His hand reached for Dominic's face. He felt the tears my son was shedding. A single touch. It was a victory for her, not for us. The weeks that followed were a carefully staged play. Dinners were no longer silent. The 3 of them sat in the kitchen, not the formal dining room. That room held too many memories of Isabella. They sat in the heart of the house, where a real family once lived. Lucas was between them. His hands were a constant blur. He signed about everything. He asked questions. He shared ideas. All the things the girl had unlocked. Is the food good? He asked the cook. The woman smiled, not understanding. Daddy looks tired. He signed one night, pointing at my son's eyes. Ellie is pretty. He signed another time. The girl blushed. Dominic coughed. The house was changing. It was losing its dignity, becoming something common. Then came the laughter. It was a Tuesday. The girl was teaching Lucas another sign. She confused the gestures. She made a strange shape with her hands. It was meant to look foolish. Lucas stared, his brow creased, then his mouth twitched. A small sound came out, a little laugh. The girl froze. Dominic stopped moving. Lucas saw their faces, and he began to laugh for real. The sound echoed in the kitchen. 8 months of dignified silence, destroyed by this noise. The girl began to cry. Dominic reached for her hand under the table. He squeezed it tightly. No one moved. They were caught in her spell. Lucas laughed and laughed. He signed that the girl was silly, over and over. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. I arrived the next weekend. I expected to find the ruins of my family, the ghost of a grandson, the disaster my son had created. Instead, I saw Lucas running in the halls. He held his little toy. He was signing at the girl. She chased him, pretending to be angry. The boy was laughing. I stood frozen in the entrance. I watched my grandson smile. A smile I had not seen since his mother died. Grandmother. Lucas signed when he saw me. He ran and took my hand. Ellie taught me. I can talk with my hands now. He showed me signs. His face was full of misplaced pride. I looked at the girl. My expression was a mask of civility. The hatred was still there. It burned behind my eyes. But another thought flickered. Perhaps, I said slowly, you have something the specialists did not. It was not a compliment. It was a concession. From me, it was a warning. By the end of the month, she had moved in. For Lucas. My son told everyone. She must be close for his lessons. No one believed him. Her room was next to the boys'. A connecting door was left unlocked. She read to him at night, signing the stories. She was there for his nightmares, there for comfort, there when he was lonely, and she was there for my son. I saw the small moments. They were like tiny seeds of poison. Dominic covering her with a blanket. The girl adjusting his tie, her fingers staying too long, their hands touching over a dish, neither moving away. His own man Vincent saw the change. First time in 8 months I have seen him smile. He said to the housekeeper, I watched them one afternoon. My son laughed at something the girl said. The housekeeper allowed herself a smile. It is not just because of the boy. No, Vincent agreed. It is not. One night, Lucas woke up screaming. No sound came out, but his mouth was open, his body twisted in the bed, his hands clawed at the air. He signed broken things that had no meaning. The girl ran in through the door. Dominic was only seconds behind her. They went to Lucas at the same time. They held him between them. I watch her with the boy. She is there when he wakes from his terrors. She is there when he needs a shield. She is there for Dominic, too. Small gestures gather like poison in a vial. Dominic covers her with a blanket. Her fingers rest too long on his tie. Their hands touch. Neither moves away. I saw the weakness in my boss. Vincent called it a smile. He is a fool. It is a surrender. One afternoon I watched him laugh, a sound I had not heard since his wife died. Mrs. Crawford smiled. She thinks it is the boy. She is a fool too. It is her. That night the boy woke screaming. A silent, awful display. His body fought enemies I could not see. His hands twisted in the sheets. She was there first. Of course. Dominic was seconds behind. They met at the child's side. They pulled him into their arms. A perfect false family. They held him as his silent horror turned to sobs. Safe, she signed to him. You are safe. My boss signed it back. They are a chorus of lies. The boy clung to them, his small arms a chain pulling them closer. His breathing slowed. But they did not move. Their arms were still around him. Their faces were inches apart. Their hands had found each other. Their fingers were laced together over the boy's body, as if letting go would shatter this illusion they built. 1 month later, he found her in the library. He asked her to walk. He had something to say. The boy was asleep. Her first task was complete. The child was pacified. Now she would claim the father. She followed him out the doors, into the garden. Garden. The night air was cool. Stars were scattered above the Chicago skyline. The city's glow was distant. Here, in my sanctuary, the world was quiet. We walked to a stone bench under an old oak. I sat down. She joined me after a moment. For a long time, there was only silence. Isabella loved this garden, I finally said. The words were quiet. She planted these flowers. She said our world was too dark. She needed beauty to come home to. Ellie just listened. When I met her, this life had already claimed me. My hands were stained. I had enemies everywhere. I believed I was beyond redemption. I stopped, looking up at the sky. But she saw something else in me. Underneath the monster, she saw a man who could be loved. She changed you, Ellie said. Her voice was soft. She was the only good thing in my life. My own voice cracked. I promised I would protect her. I built this world for her. I killed for her. But in the end, the enemy was something I could not see. It had to be done. A life for a voice. My son's voice. I justified the cost. Isabella had been taken by a sickness inside her own heart. A fortress I could not breach. I could shatter armies. I could burn cities to the ground. But I was powerless against the betrayal of her own body. This new pain, this woman Ellie, spoke of a man named Marcus. She described a cage built of false love, and I felt a familiar fire. A rage I understood. But her story was a distraction. A mirror I did not want to look into. She was a tool. A key. She had to be. I needed to see her as a solution, not as a person, not as a woman with her own ghosts. My focus had to be singular. My son. His silence was a fortress I would breach no matter the price she had to pay. My wife would have wanted me to find joy again. Ellie said those words, and they felt like poison. Isabella would want me to honor her memory with endless grief. That was my penance. My vow. The announcement was a calculated move. A contract. A prize offered for a miracle. It had nothing to do with emotion. It was about results. My hand touched her face. An instinct I could not control. Her warmth was a danger. A threat to the cold I had so carefully built around my heart. I started to speak the truth. A weakness I almost gave into. But the words would not come. I could not let them. I came for Lucas, she whispered. Not for this. But she stayed. She stayed. And that changed the equation completely. Her touch was a question I could not answer. Her face was so close. The scent of her hair filled the air. My resolve was breaking. Just for a moment, I considered it. A new beginning. Then a sound cut through the night. It was small. It was rusted from disuse. Daddy. The world stopped turning. I did not think. I did not breathe. The word came again, sharper, clearer. Daddy. I was moving before my mind could command my body. She ran beside me. Our hearts beat the same frantic rhythm. That sound was Lucas. It was my son. We stormed through the house, and I saw him. He was standing at the top of the stairs. He held a small toy in his hand. Tears coated his face, and he spoke. Again. That word. The only word that mattered. Daddy. I could not move. 8 months. 243 days of absolute silence. An army of doctors told me it was hopeless. They told me he was lost to me forever. And now he was speaking. On a normal night. In a quiet house. Daddy, don't. His little hands gripped the railing. He fought for every single word, as if it cost him a piece of his soul. Don't leave, Lucas. The words were like a physical blow. I took the stairs 2 at a time. I nearly fell. I reached him and collapsed. I pulled him into my arms. I held him so tightly, afraid he might shatter. Never. The word tore from my throat. My own tears were falling now. I will never leave you. Do you hear me? He clung to me, his body shaking. And then he spoke again. His hands moved against me. He was telling me something. Lucas scared. Daddy also leave like mommy. I made him look at me. The question was a shard of glass in my throat. Why? Why would you think I would ever leave you? His lips trembled. His words and hands told a story I did not want to hear. Daddy sad all the time. His voice was a broken thing. Daddy cry at night. Maybe Daddy want go to mommy. Leave Lucas alone. The truth was a blinding light. He had seen it all. My private grief. My secret moments of despair. He thought my sorrow was a rejection of him. He thought I wanted to die, to follow his mother and abandon him. No. The word was a roar of denial. I was sad because I miss mommy. My heart hurts, but I would never leave you. My signs were clumsy, unpracticed. You are my world, Lucas. Mommy is gone, but you are here, and I will stay with you forever. He fell against my chest, his shoulders shaking. Promise? The word was so quiet against my shirt. Promise. I kissed his hair. I swear on my very life. We stayed there, a father and a son, two broken pieces trying to become whole. Then his gaze shifted. He saw her. Ellie was at the bottom of the stairs. Her face was a mask of tears. Ellie! His voice was stronger now. Ellie! Also stay, right? I looked at her then. My eyes burned. I could not speak, but my son had asked the question for me. We were both waiting for her answer. She climbed the stairs. Each step seemed to take an eternity. She knelt beside us. She took his small hand in hers. Do you want me to stay? He nodded fiercely, as if his life depended on it. Ellie is family. He spoke the word like a prayer, a word of choice, not of blood. Her tears finally broke free. Then I will stay. Her voice was a promise. As long as you want me. He wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her into our broken circle. My hand found hers. Our fingers locked together. A new thing was being built on that staircase, not from duty, but from the ruins of our shared pain. The whispers started within days. The Castellano boy was speaking. My desperate plan had worked. They called it a miracle. They said the Iron Fist had won his gamble. They credited a cleaner, a woman from the south side with nothing to her name. They had no idea. Catherine came 3 days later. She found them in the playroom. Lucas was alive with words and signs. He was showing Ellie his drawings. He was a different child, a child full of light. Catherine stood there for a long time, just watching. I expected the usual ice, the cold judgment. Instead, she walked to Ellie and held her. I was wrong about you. Her voice was thick. Forgive me. And thank you. Everything was changing. The world I knew was falling away. Dr. Hayes arrived the next week. He ran his tests. He made his notes. He called it a medical miracle. He praised the combination of therapies. He looked at Ellie with a new kind of awe. He said she had done the impossible. But I knew the truth. It was not a method. It was not a miracle. It was her. She had not fixed him. She had shown him it was safe to speak. She had shown me it was safe to feel. She healed us both. She called it no miracle. She saw a broken child, she said. I know what she saw. A broken king and an empty throne. A week later, he took her to the cemetery, a sacred place she did not deserve to see. They walked to the one grave that mattered. Isabella Marie Castellano, beloved wife, devoted mother. Fresh flowers were there. I had put them there myself. I come every week, Dominic said. A useless ritual now. The woman knelt, a perfect performance of sorrow. You were a good person, she whispered to the stone. Empty words. She cried, false tears for a woman she was replacing. I will take care of them now, she vowed. I will love them. The words were a threat. He knelt beside her. He told her about the journal, Isabella's journal, a sacred text he was now using to woo his enemy. He told her what was inside. that Isabella wrote about a baby girl she could not save, a child whose mother begged for help, a child the system failed. He twisted Isabella's compassion into a weapon, a tool to bind this woman to him. "I failed that little girl," he quoted. "Her mother's screams will haunt me. This woman's screams." He was binding their histories together, making a myth. "She did not fail," the woman whispered. "She cared. She was absolving the ghost to win the man." He placed a new rose on the stone. "Isabella," he said, "I found someone. A confession. A betrayal spoken over her very bones." On the drive home, he took her hand. "My announcement still stands," he told her. "A promise to marry the one who healed his son." The road stretched before them. "I will marry whoever made Lucas speak," he had promised. His heart hammered in his chest. "I do not want you to accept because of obligation," he said. He looked at her. His eyes burned with a fever I thought long extinguished. She had infected him. He did not need to finish his sentence. She already knew she had won. A week later, he led her down a hidden staircase, a place she should never have seen. The council chamber, the heart of our empire. "Where are we going?" she asked. Her innocence was an insult. He opened the door. The room was a violation. A grand chamber meant for power, now draped in velvet. The long table stood empty. This was where loyalties were tested, where blood was spilled. Tonight it was a stage. Hundreds of candles burned. They cast shadows like ghosts on the walls. The chairs of our brotherhood were pushed aside. The table was empty except for one piece of paper. The document. Dominic walked to the table. He picked it up. "This is where I made my announcement," he said. His voice echoed. He spoke of his weakness, the desperation that let her in. "This is the original declaration," he told her. "A binding contract." He then took out a lighter. The flame touched the paper. It crawled across his words, consuming the promise, erasing the debt. He let the burning paper fall. It turned to ash. "I do not need this anymore," he said. Her eyes shined in the firelight. "I never wanted your empire," she whispered. "A perfect lie." "I know," he answered. He believed her. "That is why I burned it," he said. He reached into his jacket. He pulled out a small velvet box. He lowered himself to one knee. A king kneeling to his conqueror. "Eleanor Morgan," he said. "I am not doing this to fulfill a promise." He opened the box. A diamond ring. A perfect, simple trap. "I am doing this because I fell in love with you." The words were poison. Tears fell down her face. "You saved my son," he said. "You also saved me." He held out the ring. His hands trembled. "I am asking you to let me love you, to let me build a family, to erase the memory of the one he lost." "Eleanor Morgan, will you marry me?" She could not speak. The act was nearly complete. Her smile was a victory flag. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." 1,000 times yes, she cried. He slid the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit. He rose and pulled her close. Their kiss was the seal on his surrender. The door opened. The boy stood there, Vincent and Mrs. Crawford behind him, an audience of fools. The boy's eyes were wide. "Ellie, yes?" he asked. His voice was stronger now. "Her doing." "Yes, sweetheart." I said yes. The boy's smile was blinding. He ran and threw himself into their arms. "Family!" he shouted. The word echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The three of them held each other, a broken man, his child, and the serpent who had charmed them both. Dominic thanked his dead wife. "Thank you for sending her to us," he whispered. I watched from the shadows. He was thanking her for his own ruin. This was not a beginning. It was an end. A month later, the garden was filled with white roses. Our wedding was quiet. Not a display of power, but a private vow. Just 30 chairs for those who truly mattered. Vincent stood beside him, looking awkward and out of place. Mrs. Crawford cried softly into a tissue. Then I walked down the aisle. My dress was simple. On my wrist, I wore Lily's bracelet. In my hair, a crown of fresh roses. I felt beautiful. Catherine approached me, holding a silver tiara that sparkled in the sunlight. "This was Dominic's grandmother's," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every Castellano bride has worn it." She placed it carefully on my head. It felt heavy with history. But as I looked at Dominic waiting for me, I knew we were not repeating history. We were starting something new. A future built not on silence but on a shared language of hope. On her head, I taught her that. I taught her how to submit. A small, cold satisfaction settled in my chest. Some women need a firm hand. She was always so fragile, so prone to tears. I was only making her strong. Look at her now, standing straight, married to a man of power. I shaped her. I carved her from worthless clay. That man thinks he won her. But he is only enjoying my creation. He has no idea about the discipline it took, the lessons she had to learn. He does not understand that her obedience was earned with pain, my patience. She thinks she has escaped me. She thinks she has found a safe harbor. She does not know that my shadow is the only home she will ever truly know. A broken thing can only be owned, not loved. They stood before their little crowd, uttering their little promises. I wonder if she told him how our own vows went. He exchanged the rings. He sealed the lie with a kiss. A pathetic little show for a pathetic audience. Then the boy appeared. The broken replacement. He spoke to her, calling her a name she did not deserve, a title she forfeited. It struck me not like a wave, but like a shard of ice. That word was never hers to claim again. She lost that right. She pulled the boy into a false embrace, a performance for her new master. He wept, the fool. He thinks those are tears of joy. He does not see the manipulator I have known for years. A memory of my own flickered. My daughter, my real daughter, before she was ruined. A perfect little jewel. A blessing. Before it was all taken away. Later that night I imagined them in their quiet room. I saw him give her the bracelet. My daughter's bracelet. A trophy he did not earn. A relic he had no right to touch. He dared to place it on her wrist. A symbol of a life she helped destroy. She cried, of course. She always cries. It is her greatest weapon. He held her. He comforted the very person who caused all our suffering. Then the replacement boy spoke again, asking for a brother. Disgust coiled in my gut. They looked at each other and they laughed. They would try. They would dare to try and create a new life. As if the one she lost meant nothing at all. 1 year later, I saw the proof. A picture of her on some rooftop. A life built on lies. Her hand resting on a swollen stomach. 6 months. The child moved inside her. A parasite growing in the shell of my family. The boy would speak to it. He called himself a brother. He promised to share a toy. She laughed. She ran her fingers through his hair as if he were her own. He goes to school now. He has friends. He speaks. She fixed him, just like she broke everything else. That teddy bear should have been burned, a reminder of her failure. But she keeps it, a sick trophy of what she overcame. That man, her husband, has changed. He stepped back from his work. He grew soft, predictable, weak. His enemies must be laughing. His priorities shifted. Family, he calls it, a collection of broken pieces. He started a foundation, named after his dead wife, and after my daughter. He uses her name. He puts my Lily's name next to a stranger's, a charity built on my grief, a public display to wash away her guilt. They lay on blankets, looking at the empty sky. The boy asked about them, about the ghosts. She told him they were watching. She told him they were happy. A comforting lie. My daughter is not happy. My daughter is gone. Because of her. Because she was weak. Because she never listened. He pulled the boy close, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. He said they were happy because they found each other. This is not a family, it is a scar. Their gestures were a mockery, a silent insult to what was real. She joined him, her hands moving in the dark. He followed. 3 sets of hands, speaking lies to an empty heaven. Then came the quiet. The quiet I know so well. The silence of a home that has been hollowed out. She looked at him, her husband, her keeper. She thought about her journey, the story she tells herself, the one where she is the victim, the one where she escapes and finds healing, the one where I am the monster. She whispered some nonsense, that wounds lead to love. He heard her. He took her hand. He spoke of his own pain. He thinks some desperate act led him to her. He thinks he was broken. He was never broken. He was just empty, and she was the perfect vessel to fill his empty life. He was saved. He knows nothing of salvation. He only knows her deception. The boy slept between them, a pawn in her careful game. His face peaceful, ignorant. They looked at each other. No words were needed. Their lie was solid now, a fortress built on my daughter's grave. Above them, the stars were just burning gas. They were not smiling. They were not watching. There is no love born from wounds. There is only infection. There is no lesson in loss. There is only the gaping hole. And family is blood. It is a bond you cannot choose, or erase, or replace. This story did not touch my heart. It is a fantasy she tells the world, a way to justify her betrayal. I see her journey for what it is. A string of failures she blames on others. I know the truth. There is no peace. There is no happiness. There is only the life she stole from me, from Lily. Every day is a reminder of what I have lost. I see you. I see your fake smiles, your new child, your perfect life. I watch from the darkness she left me in, and I wait. Because empires fall, hearts break again, and I know her. She will never be whole. She is a broken thing, and broken things always, always shatter. I am not the villain of this story. I am the one who was left behind. I am the only one who truly remembers. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.